during the quick Q&A, if you want to raise your hand to indicate you want to ask a question, then feel free to do so too. So we're joined by two organisations today, which we're really lucky to have Mission Menopause and Covey speak with us. So Mission Menopause are going to speak first, and they're going to go through the business case for supporting menopause at work, introduce the new BSI Menstruation, Menstrual Health and Menopause in the Workplace Guide, and talk through some tangible steps that your business can take to support perimenopausal women in the workplace in line with the new guidance. I'll then introduce Michelle from Covey, who's going to talk about supporting women working with the menopause at Covey and the work they've done there. And we'll follow that with a Q&A, and we'll be finished by 12 o'clock. So for those who have joined slightly late, I'll just say there'll be time for Q&A at the end, and you can come off mute and camera off there. But during the presentations, if we can ask that we have all cameras and microphones turned off for the duration of the presentations. And if you have any tech problems, you can put them in the chat, and either myself or Nell will be able to sort them out. But for now, I will hand over to Caroline and Alyssa to introduce themselves and take you through their presentation.
Hi there, everybody. We're absolutely delighted to be joining the webinar today. First of all, if I introduce myself, so I'm Caroline Waters. I'm director and co-founder of Mission Menopause. This isn't something that I have always done. Prior to setting up Mission Menopause with Alyssa, my background, professional background in the corporate world was head of HR for a leading hospitality company in which I was head of HR for 23 years. So I was working as a senior manager within that organisation, heading up a department of 70 and looking after the HR for around 1,000 units across the country and 44,000 staff. But during that period of time, not that I'm going to be sharing my experience today, my menopause experience, I experienced menopause myself, the menopause transition, but my journey was absolutely one of hindsight. And today I was absolutely passionate about joining those dots up for both other people within an organisation, but also supporting organisations with menopause awareness, which is what we do as Mission Menopause. Alyssa.
Thank you so much. So yes, my name is Alyssa Dobson. I am the other half of Mission Menopause, and my background was 20 odd years in the healthcare industry. I was actually a non-clinical operating theatre manager and a hospital ops manager. But about 5 years ago, I was experiencing anxiety and increased depression and horrendous brain fog. At the time, I did not join the dots. I did not understand it was to do with my hormonal journey, and when I reached out for help, nobody mentioned the potential of menopause or the hormones on me. It actually led me to leaving my career, and at the time I thought I was isolated. I didn't realise I'd joined the statistics of many women who do leave their careers. So that's led me to wanting to be part of the solution and the change, and really embed this conversation within organisations to understand why having conversations and understanding and education is so key. So just absolutely delighted to be here today. So let's get started. I just want to start with why we're actually here talking about menopause. So have you ever considered how menopause impacts not only individuals, but also your organisation as a whole? Picture this: a rapidly growing demographic in the workforce, a significant impact on workplace dynamics, and a subject that's often shrouded in silence. Today, we're going to shine a spotlight on why talking about menopause in the workplace is crucial. Imagine a workplace where everyone feels supported, empowered, and valued, regardless of their age, gender, or life stage. This is the vision we're discussing today, where menopause is a topic we address openly and inclusively. And the topic of inclusion in the conversation about menopause is vital, as this natural life transition impacts on all genders, ethnic backgrounds, ages, and walks of life. And although today we will be using the term woman, we recognise the wider impact this topic has on everyone. So let's look at this from a business perspective. We know women are living longer. It is reported that women outlive men in almost every society. Women are increasingly working in full-time employment. And the UK economy looks dramatically different today from how it did in, say, the 1970s. We know that the state pension age has increased from around age 60 in 2010, increasing to 65 in 2024, and it's reported it could reach 68 by 2046. And in a recent study from the BSI Lifting the Glass Ceiling report, there's an emphasis of the importance of addressing menopause at work, with 54% of women believing it would be difficult to raise the topic of menopause with an employer. So we know menopause is a crucial topic in the workplace due to its widespread impact. Women over 50 represent a rapidly growing workforce demographic. A significant number of menopausal women are part of the labour force. And creating a supportive work environment can have a positive impact, including improved employee morale and retention. So what does this mean on an individual level? Next slide, please. So we know menopause can be financially and productivity-wise expensive for both individuals and businesses. A recent CIPD report found that 67% of respondents reported psychological symptoms, including anxiety, depression, loss of confidence, and memory loss, as the most common symptoms negatively affecting their work. There's a lingering stigma around the topic that needs to be dismantled, requiring increased education, resources, and support, particularly in the workplace. And we know many women feel unheard, unable to ask for help, and sometimes marginalised. We also know that a lack of employer support has led women, like myself, to leave the workplace, with approximately 25% considering leaving and with about 10% actually leaving. Businesses are losing valuable female talent when they should be leveraging their skills and experience to progress. Around 8% are avoiding promotions, hindering their career advancement. So we know women facing menopause-related challenges often feel unheard and marginalised in the workplace. There is a prevailing stigma surrounding menopause that needs to be addressed and removed. Lack of employer support can lead women to contemplate leaving the workforce prematurely. And this results in significant financial losses due to absenteeism and the loss of intellectual capital as valuable female talent exits the workforce prematurely. So let's explore the case for supporting menopause at work. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Alyssa. Well, I'd like to start with a rhetorical question. How many women in the UK are experiencing menopause? Now, given the average age of menopause in the UK is 51, with symptoms typically starting in our early 40s, if we just consider the menopause, this can affect a good proportion of our person's working life. At this point, it might be worth reflecting on the age demographics of your own organisation, not only considering the number of people directly affected by menopause, but also the generations to come. How many of you are experiencing skill shortages, recruitment challenges, and retention of talented employees? Within this current economic landscape, alongside a significant number of employees experiencing menopause in the workplace, and in a time when employees and stakeholders are more socially aware and have expectations about their well-being, it is imperative that organisations re-evaluate their policies, their support, their education, and their job and workplace designs to make them suitable not only for all employees, but also give consideration to menopause. Now, there are also legal considerations. Under the Equality Act 2010, although there is no expressly protected characteristic for menopause, legal protection is likely to arise as a result of protection from discrimination in relation to sex, age, or disability, or a combination of. Now, we know that tribunal claims in relation to menopause have tripled since 2018 and are likely to rise given increased awareness. Within the last few weeks, you may have seen in the press companies who have lost their tribunal claims at great financial and reputational cost. And as employers, let's briefly consider our duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act in relation specifically to menopause symptoms. Simply, we need to ensure working conditions do not exacerbate an employee's symptoms to such an extent that it would expose them to material risks to their health, safety, or welfare. Now, there is also a financial case for taking into account menopausal health. There are direct financial costs associated with increased sickness and absence, lower productivity, and the recruitment and training of new staff to replace those that have left. There are also indirect costs due to the loss of talent, knowledge, and experience within the organisation. In addition, it can affect your organisation's diversity agenda, gender pay gap, retention of female talent, employee well-being, and of course, the company's reputation. Therefore, looking after menopausal health is absolutely key to encouraging longer and more fulfilling working lives, which is the reason the British Standards Institute created their new standard. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at the new standard. There have been some really positive changes and actions that have taken place over the course of the last couple of years. Now, notwithstanding the high-profile celebrities who have done a really great job at raising awareness, the government has also taken some action too. This year, the government appointed the first National Menopause Ambassador, Helen Tomlinson, focused on menopause in the workplace, to encourage and disseminate awareness, good practice and guidance to employers. Back in May, we attended the launch of the new BSI's new standard called Menstruation, Menstrual Health and Menopause in the Workplace. And this is a guide to tackle taboos and really help keep talented people in work. Now, the guide has been developed to offer guidance to organisations on how they can effectively support employees with their experience of menstruation and menopause transition. As workplaces were first established at a time when women were only a minority of the workforce, they were really rarely designed with the consideration of menstruation and menopause. Today, a significant proportion of the workforce experiences the menopause transition, yet that has not necessarily meant that workplace environments or practices and cultures have been adapted to accommodate the needs of women and other employees, such as transgender men and non-binary individuals who experience the menopause transition. As menopause experience can impact on employees' attendance or their ability to perform certain duties and their job satisfaction, it is absolutely vital that employers understand how they can foster an inclusive workplace culture and make helpful adjustments. Workplace guidance that supports the menopausal experience of employees is not only advantageous to employees themselves, but can also ensure the retention of experienced staff and attract newly highly skilled employees. The guide itself is practical in its approach, which is fantastic. It's targeted at managers, HR, health and safety, D&I specialists, occupational health, and actually also applies to architects and designers of office spaces. The guide is of benefit to any member of staff responsible for managing performance, workload, well-being, and the work environment. I think sitting today here with my HR hat on, it's a really helpful guide. Helpfully, it's been structured as a toolkit and divides the practical actions into 5 categories, which are detailed on the slide, each of which includes multiple recommendations that organisations can consider. Now, importantly, the guidance acknowledges a diverse range of workplace settings and job roles, which is fantastic for any organisation to consider. So it's not only targeted at large organisations and office environments, it also gives recommendations that are relevant to SMEs, hybrid roles, highly physical roles, and outdoor settings. We are pleased that the guide has been published, as it really does give businesses the tools to provide practical ways of helping employees experiencing menopause, and also supports and complements the work that we're already doing with organisations. So, how can you help at business level in your organisation? Next slide, please. We understand that this is a journey for any organisation, as there is an awful lot to consider. The journey really does depend on what provisions you might already have in place. However, as guidance to become menopause aware, we recommend considering the following steps. And I would just caveat that these steps are not necessarily in the order that you need to take them. So let's start out providing menopause education for all. It's really important to offer up-to-date and relevant training and signposting for everyone to give a greater understanding of menopause and its impact in the workplace. Consider having a menopause policy or guidance. Now, this is often the first question that we get asked. And what I would always say is when considering a policy, it's just really important that it's consistent with your policy strategy. Equally, it's really important to review any existing policies that you might have to include menopause. And by that, I mean your sickness and absence policy, for example, your performance management policy and flexible working policy are all really great examples of policies that need to perhaps be reviewed. Supporting cultural change, it's really important that we remove the stigma and taboo at all levels of the organisation to really help normalise the conversation. This is absolutely key. And quite often, if you're starting out on a journey, this can be a great place to start. And there are many different ways that we can actually do this. But leading the change from the senior team through to all levels of the organisation is clearly best practice. By way of example, just in terms of things like sharing stories or sharing experiences, and certainly experiences that perhaps involve workplace experiences and possibly effects on careers, can be a great way to actually start that conversation. So yeah, remove the stigma and taboo is really, really important. Training people managers. Again, providing appropriate education for line managers, HR teams, health and safety, D&I, to best support staff and importantly manage sensitive conversations is key, along with things like understanding the legal implications and really understanding what reasonable adjustments can be provided to support an individual are all key components of training people managers. Providing flexibility and trust. We really want to create a culture of trust and respect. And when we're talking about flexibility, yes, lots of consideration needs to be given to that flexibility. But here we would be looking at flexibility, maybe in terms of working hours as a possible readjustment and potentially location. When considering reasonable adjustments, consider those practical adjustments that really could help individuals with their menopause symptoms at work and review them regularly with employees. There are lots and lots of examples, but examples could include, by way of example, appropriate uniforms, things like access to fans and working from home as potential options. And finally, developing support networks. By developing support networks and providing positive communications, adequate support, safe spaces, and advice for staff are all key in terms of this journey that you might take as an organisation. And you might also want to consider introducing trained menopause champions in the same way that we have mental health champions in the workplace. All of these really do support employees throughout the organisation. And very finally, become menopause aware. I mean, stand out from the crowd. Given the current economic climate, we really do need to be putting menopause on the map for both our employees, but also our customers and perhaps your wider network. Being that employer of choice at this moment in time really does make good business sense. But with all of that in mind, where do you even start? Next slide, please.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Caroline. So now we've explored why we need to be talking about menopause, we've looked at the business case, and we've given you some steps an organisation can consider. But where do you start? It doesn't matter whether you are currently in terms of becoming menopause aware. What is important is that you recognise and value your menopausal employees. A workplace checklist is a great starting point. We've included our checklist, which can be downloaded using the QR code. And this tool is split between 4 key areas identified through the BSI guide, which is culture, policy, training, and environment. It will help you identify where you are currently and where there may be scope for improvement. So just as menopause is a transformative journey, embracing a menopause-aware organisational culture marks the initial step toward numerous positive and empowering outcomes. We work with organisations to support their next steps through the implementation of in-house training programs, consultancy, and ongoing support. So thank you so much for today, and we look forward to the rest of the webinar.
Thanks so much, both. So it's great to hear so many such a practical approach to supporting menopause in the workplace, both via the BSI guidance, which is obviously available, and also from the guidance that you provided as well there. And the workplace checklist is a great place to start. I think it gave us a really good kind of holistic overview and introduction to supporting menopause in the workplace. We're going to look now at kind of how some of these policies and principles have really been brought to life within an organisation. And we're going to use COVID as our kind of case study and example today. And we're going to look at the great work they've been doing. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Michelle.
Thank you. Just to introduce myself, I'm Michelle Bridgewood. I'm head of HR at COVID in the UK. Next slide, please. And the next one. So we are an engineering consultancy. We employ just over 500 employees in the UK. 32% of those are female employees, just to give you a bit of context of what we are. So in terms of why did we look at this? Why did we introduce menopause in the workplace? From working in HR over the years, when we were a smaller company, there'll be occasions where women who are going through menopause would come and speak to me privately. They didn't really want to speak to their managers and say that they're suffering with the symptoms, and they didn't really know what to do. They'd been to their doctors. So we recognised that as a pattern that we needed to provide support for women going through this. And this was before Davina McCall, and I think that's sort of been the starting point for a lot of organisations, have sort of pushed that conversation going. So we realised that we need to make sure that we need to look after our current staff. We realise that this is part of our retention as well, retaining our skills that we've got as we've become a bigger organisation. And the main thing, we wanted to normalise the conversation, not just for women to come forward, but for managers to be able to have those conversations. So next slide, please. So what did we do at Covey? Between myself and our head of health and safety, we discussed the menopause. What can we do? The first thing was to understand what the menopause is and how it affects performance. How does it affect people in the workplace? That was our starting point. Once we understood sort of the facts and the statistics and how the symptoms affect people, and there are a lot of symptoms, we realised that the next step was to get senior leadership on board, make sure they understood the facts and figures, why it's important, and the need to make sure that we still attract and retain female talent. We then created a menopause policy, just so that we had one point of information and a policy procedure that covers what support is out there. We then created webinars for all staff so they could understand what menopause is. It started that communication. And then we trained our line managers as well to understand what it's about, how it affects people, what the symptoms are, what support they can give, and what adjustments are out there, just so that they've got a complete understanding of what to expect and how to have those conversations. We then created a menopause portal page. So that's the picture on the left there, just so that there's one source of information that people can go to, that's male or female. So it lists out what is menopause, what is perimenopause. There's a huge list of symptoms, because I think that was the main thing, that people had symptoms and didn't really know that it was part of the menopause. They just either felt anxious, having hot flushes, heavy bleeding. So we listed all those out on there, and then put some useful information, useful web links. And we also created monthly menopause coffee and chat session, which I'll go into a bit later. So the dates of those are all on that portal page. So next slide, please. So in terms of our menopause policy, that's accessible for all our staff, and it was 3 key areas that it covered. So number 1 was raising awareness of the menopause and its impact in the workplace. 2, most importantly, was to encourage that open conversation between line managers and their team, and it's okay to discuss menopause. And then the 3rd one was to direct employees to the relevant advice. We're not the experts at Covey, but it's to pinpoint where you can get useful information from, and what support's there, and any adjustments that we can make as a business as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of supporting the line managers, we highlighted that everybody's different, everyone's got different symptoms, so there's no one size fits all. And it's about making sure that you focus on the person and not the problem. It's about allowing adequate time to have conversations with your member of staff, making sure there's confidentiality, finding an appropriate room so you're not discussing it in an open plan office, encourage them to speak openly and honestly, and knowing that this is part of a normal conversation in the workplace helps with that. They can suggest ways in which they can be supported in terms of symptom support. There's some information there, but we know that there are other sources, and to go to the GP, just so that we're not enforcing support that might not be suitable. Agreeing actions of how to implement them and having a follow-up with that member of staff, and agree who in the team needs to be informed if they want to inform others. Because if you're having hot flushes and you need a fan, it may be that you want to let people in your team know that you need to be somewhere that is in a cooler place. And making sure there is time to follow up appropriately and not just in the kitchen or by the water cooler. There is a proper time to follow up and make sure that you're checking in with that person. So there were some of the tips that we went through with line managers. Next slide, please. So this is our biggest impact I think we've made as a business, is having a menopause coffee and chat. So once we've announced everything to employees in terms of what it is, we're having a conversation. The line managers have had an update and been trained on symptoms, how to have the conversation. It was the menopause coffee and chat sessions that have been the most powerful. So we have these around once a month. There's no set agenda for these meetings. Anybody in the company is invited, regardless of gender, and it's a safe space just to talk openly about this. Sometimes people don't want to say that much, and we'll start a conversation with, we're having difficulty sleeping, are there any tips to share? And then that gets the conversation going. We found it to be really useful. It's very open and respectful. People are joining in. It's open to anybody, as I said. If people want to turn up and just listen to what the conversation is, they can join. It's all via Teams because we're located in different locations. And if you want to put your camera on, you can do. If you'd rather just sit back and just listen to the conversation, then that's fine as well. But we have found that there are useful conversations that happen in that space. There's no meeting notes that are taken, but any good suggestions that are raised during those discussions that we send back to the business to see if we can make some adjustments. And one thing that's come out of this is that we provide sanitary wear in all our toilets in the company, because we realise that it can be a surprise sometimes when your period comes and goes and not in a regular period. So we have those as a suggestion as well. So that's been really useful, and we find both sexes join those meetings. Next slide, please. Let's go back one. So we had a list of useful resources that we explored as a business before we started doing any training with people, and we've shared these on our portal page. So we wanted some that are from the NHS. We have Bupa, because our private healthcare is with Bupa. We have our employee assistance program on there as well. So it was just alternative different routes in terms of information out there. So it's not just people that are going through the menopause, it's perimenopause, those who have had a medical procedure that's affected that or triggered the menopause as well. So there's lots of useful information out there. And on the left was just a screenshot from our employee assistance program, so that if you didn't want to use a website or call, then there is the employee assistance program that's got lots of fact sheets. There's lots of information out there, and I think it depends on your symptoms of what you need, but our managers have been trained to pinpoint the right information, as well as our HR team and health and safety as well. So that's the experience that we have in COVID, and the final slide was just, let's talk menopause. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much for that, Michelle. And it's really good to see kind of like, I mean, kind of following on from the sort of practical approach of Mission Menopause's presentation as well. It's great to see that kind of like step-by-step guide as to how, or step-by-step process as to how COVID went from kind of that first starting off point of actually, okay, how do we even understand the kind of like what's required of us, all the way through to the place where you are now, where you're providing resources and support, and the menopause coffee mornings. Yeah, it's great to see that kind of like process that people could follow. So we have time for Q&A now. If people in the meeting chat, if you have questions, you can either pop them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and come off mute and ask directly. But I had a couple of questions just to kind of get us started, and I guess this is a question for you, Michelle, first. So line manager responsibility and capability is like really essential, as it is for any sort of like diversity and inclusion initiative. Did you face any barriers or obstacles during the kind of upskilling process? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Fortunately, there were no barriers. We've got quite a good open culture in Covey, and we've done a lot of D&I type events previously. So everybody was very open, wanting to learn. And I think with menopause, we have managers of varying different ages, and where we have perhaps more male line managers, they're more interested to know how they can support family members at home. So everything was very open. There was no resistance to this at all. And I think because we're open with the discussions of something like this, I think it's just helps that atmosphere.
I think that's probably testament to the work that you've done in other areas of EDI, if they were already kind of like receptive and open to learning that. So that's great to hear. And that kind of is kind of related to another question that I had for the Mission Menopause team. So obviously you kind of mentioned, Michelle mentioned that there'd been a lot of wider work done in the kind of like EDI space that maybe kind of primed the line managers for the upskilling around menopause. Could you just talk a little bit about kind of the importance of having menopause or menstruation support as part of a kind of like holistic, wider EDI policy, and like not just looking at it in isolation, but the importance of having it as a kind of more joined up strategy?
Yeah, I think just in terms of perhaps some of the experience that we have in terms of working with other organisations, the reality of it is that in most cases that it will be an example, or it will be work that has been worked on, as part of that overall holistic approach. And I think for a lot of employers, the reality of the piece around attraction and retention of female talent is probably at the fore in terms of the examples of maybe the organisations that we're working with, and I suppose quite often, just in terms of what we would say, it really does feel that this is perhaps the approach that companies are now taking, very similar to the approach that they did perhaps with mental health 10 years ago, so to speak. So yeah, in reality, this is come to the fore, but it does fit into that more holistic approach that organisations seem to be taking.
Okay. We've got a couple of questions in the chat. So, well, firstly, some positive feedback from Susie Moore, saying that the coffee and chat sessions are really useful, and it is really good that it's open to all genders. I've learned a lot of the males on the chat supporting women in their lives, and that's something that we've seen in other organisations we've worked with as well. There's been other WISE members who have introduced kind of like menopause support sessions or training, and always kind of encourage attendance by all genders, because it's really important to bring men on the journey too. Lindsay Chapman asks, any tips for getting staff on board who have already been through the menopause and don't see the need to have a policy, or don't support having a policy?
Yeah, I think you can come across this, and the conversation just there with regard to men. I think being that where we have found where you have maybe some of those barriers, when we start talking about being menopause for all, and having that inclusive approach about not only supporting employees who may be directly affected in the workplace, but supporting employees obviously from a line manager perspective or as equally important, given that we all hopefully bring our authentic self to work, really about how this has an effect with regard to maybe family members or friends or colleagues outside of work. So I guess when having those conversations that are more open and again holistic in terms of their approach, not just about the workplace, I think really kind of helps make maybe women that have transitioned through understand that perhaps where they can support and offer that kind of mentorship to colleagues or to other line managers as part of that overall workplace journey. So it is about that kind of messaging about overall, overall awareness for everybody, and perhaps utilising some of that experience in terms of things like showcasing stories or experiences of work and getting them involved in that way.
I'd also like to add, I think absolutely, it's also understanding that the culture of work has changed, and as we sort of highlighted right at the beginning, women have we're working longer, we're living longer, but also we tend now to be in what we class as a sandwich years. So we are most likely going to be going through menopause at the same time as still caring for children at home. We may be supporting older parents or family members, or whilst juggling work and the hormonal change. So I think sometimes it's about understanding that some women who have gone through menopause and post-menopause may not feel comfortable or feel it appropriate to talk about because it wasn't done during their journey, but actually understanding that by talking about it, by offering that extra support, by removing the silence about it, it actually benefits everybody in organizations and the community. We do a lot of work with all sorts of different groups, and it's interesting when you actually start talking to like teenagers who are living at home with a menopausal woman and saying, where's my mother gone? What's happened? What's happened to her? Or, there's so many different experiences that people are facing. So I think it is sometimes, being challenging in that sort of mindset of we shouldn't be talking about it because there are benefits.
Yeah, I really like the idea of kind of their potential to be role models or kind of or mentors. That's a great way of involving people, I think, and helping them see that their experience can actually be really supportive to others. Helen Allen asks, how do you keep the momentum going with the menopause coffees, brackets, maintaining or growing participation, etc.?
We put those in the diary each month, and it's just a natural way of just getting people on board. The invite goes out to all staff, and rather than just putting a whole host of them for the next 12 months, we just have one, then put the date in the diary for the next one. It varies in terms of numbers, but we do get a reasonable number to have that conversation and perhaps go into sort of details of what's worked. And I think at a smaller group, you probably get more out of it because everyone feels that they can then speak up a bit more. But the momentum, we've been doing this for over a year, and it still is that good momentum. It just makes sure that you've got topics to discuss. If things sort of, the conversation dries up sometimes, that it just takes one person to say, oh, this is what I'm experiencing, or have you heard about this? This could help you. And that's, and even some of our men join in the conversation as my wife's experiencing this. What do you think? And it's to reassure them that, oh yeah, we've been feeling like that, and this is what you can perhaps try.
Yeah, I think that can sometimes be a misconception that we have with some of our like training sessions or like best practice sharing events as well, where there's this conception that you have to have like a really like good size or great or big number each time, whereas actually some of the most kind of like engaging and insightful sessions have involved with had like a smaller number, because for that very reason, that people feel they can express themselves more and the conversation can get kind of like deeper and more detailed. So I think that's a really great point. we have a hand up. Kim, would you like to come off mute and ask
Hi.
our guests?
It's a question for Michelle, please, if that's okay. Michelle, I can see that your company is, you've got a Bupa private insurance, is that correct?
Yep.
So do you actually have a menopause policy within this? Because there are only certain treatments that you can get on the NHS, and I've discovered since needing testosterone that it's not covered, it's not prescribed by the NHS, so I've had to go private. And since having to go private, I found out that our medical insurance doesn't actually cover menopause.
Yeah, we've looked into this ourselves and it doesn't include it. Unfortunately, I think things like menopause, anything to do with giving birth, those sort of aspects aren't covered under the policy. I'm not sure where, if any other healthcare providers would do that.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah, but certainly we have looked at it. Bupa do have a lot of useful information on their website on menopause. There's lots of information that Bupa do, and different sort of videos as well. That's been the useful thing. But in terms of the healthcare for private members, then no, it doesn't. For us, it doesn't cover it. We've asked the question.
Okay, thank you.
Alyssa or Caroline, do you have any insights in terms of like healthcare providers or health insurance providers that maybe are sort of like best in class for menopause support? Have you had any insights around that?
It's a really difficult one because there's obviously still a bit of a postcode lottery in terms of healthcare, NHS healthcare support that people are able to get. The issue with testosterone is real, and at the moment it is only regulated within the UK for use in terms of really low libido for women. However, we hope as more research goes on, then that will start to change. There are a lot of private providers out there. Again, they don't cover the whole all nations, you know, equally. I would say always just do your research, ask questions not only about what the initial appointment gives you, but actually that follow-up, because it's that ongoing prescription issue. So I've spoken to lots and lots of people who have had to, you know, decided they've had to go private for the initial appointment, being prescribed, you know, their HRT or including testosterone privately, but then they are struggling to get it through the NHS. So that is a real problem. There are some services out there. So there's an app called the Stellar app, which is sort of like more of a business EAP type system that offers sort of private GP appointments, and you can get your HRT directly sent to you. So, you know, there are different options out there, but it's a matter of doing a bit of that research first. I'd also say is, you know, our top tip if you're going to go and speak to your GP is one, always try and ask to speak to the menopause specialist if there is one at your practice, or at least a women's health specialist. Try and get a double appointment if you can. Take a symptom tracker, or, you know, keep a record of the issues of why you're going into that appointment. But actually, when you get to the appointment, actually start the conversation with, I'd like to talk about my menopausal journey or my hormones or anything else. If you start the conversation with, you know, I'm suffering from anxiety or depression or whatever it is, and I've spoken to many GPs, then their brain immediately starts to think about that initial problem rather than the wider holistic issues. So that would be my top tips.
I think that's really helpful, because I think probably a lot of people on the call, like myself included, might not have realised that a lot of GPs would have like menopause specialists on hand that you could ask for, and the ability to ask for double appointments. So I think that's yeah, really helpful.
I would say it's not always easy to get, but it's definitely worth
It's good to
pursuing.
know that they're out there though, and like to try and do research to try and find the opportunity to engage with them. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
yeah. There's no more questions in the chat currently, but I was going to ask one more question as well, just again for Mission Menopause. So if an organisation was starting out with the workplace checklist, potentially the one that is available via Mission Menopause, and they kind of complete their checklist and find that they've got quite a long way to go on their journey, what's the next step from that point? Once you've gone through your checklist and you've got that, it's completed, what's next?
Yeah, I mean, I think we recognise that each organisation will be individual in its approach. I guess probably that the first step, and I think we tend to get the first step being about the menopause policy, and I don't necessarily sit here and advocate that you need a specific menopause policy, and it is really important that it fits into your strategy with regard to policies. But I think if you're looking at that list and you're at the start of the journey, starting normalizing the conversation is probably the most important first step. And for some organizations, that can be, it feel like a bit of a barrier if the conversation has never happened in the workplace already. And typically what we find that tends to work is perhaps introducing just a lunch and learn type menopause awareness webinar that fits in as part of maybe the wellbeing strategy, so that you're introducing a topic as part of that wellbeing calendar, and then that in reality can really start to break down the conversation and introduce conversation, because it's always kind of really that first step as to how you might support the journey. And I think from there that's where you can start perhaps getting feedback, learning about what you might want to include in your menopause policy, but importantly, how certainly from, maybe from an HR perspective, how you might put that case together for, that being signed off within your organisation. So that is often a good step to take as the first step.
Fantastic. Okay, so there's no more questions in the chat. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I'll just bring the Q&A session to a close there. If we move on to the next slide, please. Now, I'm sure everyone on the call will agree with me in saying that both that Melissa and Caroline and Michelle have all been like great guests today, and they've given us some great insights, both from kind of that broader perspective, but also from like within an organisation. If you'd like to tell us or tell them how fantastic they've been, please scan the QR code on screen. That should take you to a feedback form that you can fill out quickly as well. Also, any comments that you have are always greatly appreciated too. It helps us run our events and make sure that we're always improving and delivering what we can for members and non-members. Nell, in the disguise of Hannah, has also put a link to that in the chat function too. And the last thing for me to say on the final slide is that both myself and Mission Menopause, and I'm sure Michelle as well, are really happy to be contacted if you've got any further questions or anything you'd like to pose directly to us. So you can either email myself and I can disseminate any questions or put you in touch with any of our speakers today, or you can get in touch with Mission Menopause on the contact details below. We'll leave those on screen. And last thing for me to say is just thank you so much to the three of you for taking part in the session today. It was super insightful. Pleasure to host. Thank you everyone who attended. Hopefully we'll see you on another WISE webinar soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Bye.